begin day 3. So and I'm really surprised that we still have as many people here. Yeah, exactly. Couldn't catch earlier flights, huh? So I just wanted to do a quick overview of where we were. So yesterday we did some things of some basic registration things, how some data works, and how it works and so on. Today, what we're going to talk about, we didn't get time to talk about nucleic acids. We talked about proteins a bit, but not nucleic acids. So we're going to move that into today. We're also talking a bit about polymers, diverse substances and mixtures, as well as specified substance group 1. In the interest of time, I doubt we'll be able to do very, very interactive walkthroughs of these. So free to follow along. But I may have to go a little faster than people will be able to keep up with these. We do a general overview of these. We'll go on to a brief explanation of some of the API functions, and I'll give you some interactive demos, followed by some data generation edits from the FDA data and what the general strategy has been for that. Then we'll give you our overview of the road for software development, where we're going now, what our plans are, and discussion. Now, this is our general outline of this. Of course, discussion is really part of all of this. This is somewhat a useless exercise if you don't have people giving feedback as we go along. So I urge you to do so. Yeah.
I have a question relating to the
Let me start the actual session with a feedback from yesterday that either occurred to you later on or that you get.
Yesterday we explained that we export data.
Yeah.
And more or less import the data using the JSON file.
Yeah.
I was just thinking about the IDs, for instance. We have our own algorithm to generate our own system. And if us what happens to those IDs? Are they discarded?
So the IDs that are generated, they actually go into there's a section for codes. As an ID is generated, it has both a high-level approval ID as a primary key, and it also goes into the code section. If someone would import this, they would overwrite your approval ID, but they'd import your approval ID into their code section. So it gives it a less prominent position, if that makes sense.
Yes,
an additional code, but it kind of loses its primary status, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Do you have suggestions on how you'd like this to be maintained? But James, this is the first way that we've implemented. Other questions or specific questions?
Yes, another question. So the idea of concept is not part of the IDMP system.
That's right.
But it's really necessary for the life cycle management.
That's right.
Is there any plan to propose it be added to the stuff?
So it's a great question. I think it's a little above my pay grade. So I will ask those standard authors in the room. The idea of the question is basically, let me put it this way: the ISO 123A talks about substances and what's required and specified substances. It doesn't talk about these things that are previous, those specified substances that all concepts. It are plans to give some general overview or give some addition to the ISO standard to mention that you can do these kinds of things. I had concerns was that it actually didn't want to make the idea of a concept terribly easy to use to some extent. But you don't want people just to fall back on that and have something that actually is a substance or a group of substances. They decide, well, I'm just going to put it as a concept.
sense of substance through product life cycle? Like when you're an antibody, and then you're walking through how that proceeds.
For us, I mean, we're not so much interested in preclinical development at this point.
Right.
We would accept it that it has good box data, but when it goes into humans is when we want to get it. Again, it will be given an ID. That ID will be partly associated with this. Unless you're a veterinary product, then of course, we should, register it when it was a veterinary, if you're going to bring it forward in the veterinary clinical trials or something. But once it gets an ID, it will stay with that ID. Now, what changes the specified substance and things like that. And of course, direct formulation will probably change as you go through, but the actual substance ID, we hope will be associated with the material. Yeah. They get proteins or some of the more complex things. I mean, they get, a lot of times, when it first, at least previously, when things first got in clinical trials, you not even know all the glycosylation sites. You might know all the disulfide bonds, depending on what the protein is. And, they evolve, but you hopefully know the sequence at some point. So,
Thinking from industry perspective,
right.
trying to
Well, we would like to get it, and again, it's not official policy or anything, I think there's been some guidance put out, where, you want to get a unique code prior to the clinical trial. So that we're prior to ID. I mean, it's where we eventually want to go. And then as you go forward, of course, as we get more with more structured data and CC sections and other things, anything you would have in your application or EA, that systems would then have an ID as well. So we're able to tie everything together.
So you're saying that if someone, at the beginning of a product life cycle, if someone's discovering more information about a substance, that wouldn't change its ID just because you discovered something more.
It's material and
Sure.
that's
But it would change the ID if you just decided to change salt forms. If you decided.
Yeah, salt forms would be a different ID if you had different hydration forms. Would be a different ID. Solvate forms and things like that. Yeah, but I think if you change, at least if you change state of hydration, you wouldn't have to file a new ID. If you picked another polyform, you could probably get them under the same IND and things like that. Only if you change salt, it's maybe a different question. But certainly if you went to different polymorph, you'd still probably the same IND. I mean, I don't know but it's a different ID. If there's a different ratio between and solvates, that would get a different ID. Go ahead.
I'm not logged in, but I have a picture of the presentations, all the context points from part of the substance, and just the whole identity period when you have to go to a certain point of what you stands or type stands. So I will look it up and send it to Noel or to Tyler, and then you can put it on the screen. That's custom. Yeah.
To me, what Alina said yesterday, that in case that the unique ID will change because the document split or deleted, it's very important to track the history and to give the possibility to know this is the old ID and that to be mapped to the new one. I think it's a very important point to emphasize.
No, that's fine. I think that the proper procedure of using the software or using any regulators would need there's kind of necessity there to be a report that's generated electronically that keeps track of all of the.
Certainly on our NLM site, again, like Frank said, there's 24 merged, you don't see 18, but we do keep track of that. But it's not that frequent of an event. I mean, we're not constantly, because but again, it does happen occasionally, and
Actually, most of them are vetted by plants.
Yeah.
That are so poorly tried, and anonymity is still being, root by the experts,
I think one of the main purposes of ISO 11238 is these merges would be less and less common because the fields are so defined rather than being
in a few of the chemicals, that's why we have this alternative definition thing, Ursula, where, you know, you can capture these other definitions, because there has been cases where, you know, we put something that's a chemical and it was put as a protein too, but, you know, but that's not too often.
Yeah, well, I'm just gonna, a simple example of glucose, that there are two good ways to represent glucose, either the closed form or the open chain. Now, the chemical abstract actually went with the open chain, and because that was easier to describe, we went with that as well, because what was the range? Structure. Even though everyone on the street is going to draw it. So we performed point two.
So your point is that having visibility of changes there, and also having some sort of periodic report from any given system would be necessary. Anyone else?
So far, our mergers are less than 10%. Which is better than the chemical abstract.
It is.
All right. So there are no further comments or suggestions. I will just get into a quick demo of nucleic acid. Thinking there? Hopefully, as we did yesterday, the system which I'm going here, there are tools, and they are kind of in their own realm. Proteins are in between the realm of chemicals and proteins are very close to chemicals, and the distinction between them can often be range. And nucleic acids are handled very similar to these proteins. So these three things that I'm discussing are coming kind of in sequence. Polymers and structurally diverse are somewhat their own group of things. They're a little bit different. And mixtures also are sort of the all case as well. The specified substance group 1 is handled on, so we just go to our back and forth between a lot. I'll just go and register a nucleic acid. In the interest of time, I'm just going to click the import button and load up. Name, nucleic acid, very good name. Okay. So the nucleic acid layout and definitional information is very similar to the protein layout. If you didn't have it, you wouldn't know different. So the
would it be possible to zoom in?
oh my goodness, what happened?
What happened?
Let me make this on your big.
Oh, yeah, you know.
Thank you.
Starting with just as with protein sequences, you're really talking in about subunits. About subunits here as well. Instead of subunits of there's subunits of for subunits. For instance, maybe I have one subunit. Appears, and I'm able to pin the amino acid sequence. I'm sorry, sequence. Sequence. This will just kind of so you can read it slightly easier. And over individual elements, you can see one difference between this layout here of nucleic acids and amino acids. That amino acids are shown right side by side with letters touching, and nucleic acids show with a little hyphen. The reason is that the way this is represented is there are sugars attached linkages, sugar detects linkages, bases on the top. So we explicitly allow you to see that there is a linkage. So you see hover over this, you see this is adenine. But the next part, you'll see that the linkage is a site 1 prime, and it's a phosphate actor. Each one of those will do is it's not uncommon for somebody to accidentally have a 5' to 3' versus 3' to 5', or whichever one that they might have. So you can just reverse the sequence as you put it accidentally in the wrong order. Similarly, you could duplicate it and change it around. With proteins, the ability to say whether it's complete, incomplete, or unknown. And beyond this is where we start to diverge fairly significantly from proteins. So in the general way that this is done is choose between the 20 amino acids and the 20 less of them, and lowercase for D amino acids. And we allow individual sites of modification. Acids, this is there is finality in that. There are sugars, linkages, and nucleobases. To specify for each site which sugar you're referring to. So down to the sugars button, click that. By default, it will say that it will assume that you're using ribose as your sugar. You can click view to see what that sugar looks like. So in this case, rendered to see where the 5' end is, where the 3' end, where the base is. This is the B2, the 5' is where it's attached up, and the 3 is where it's attached down. And specify first you can specify which sugar you might want to use, like deoxyribose. Then which site. So right by default it's selecting all of the sites, but I can say that I can toggle to say it's not actually used at these sugars, these base sites. And it might be that is select for a different site, and if they say it is these sites that use these sugars. Then, if I've completed that, I go back at the sequence. I'll just see a color coding of which sugars are attached to each sequence. However, I can see the combined base and sugar fragments. They're color coded so that the base is clear in purple, and the sugar is colored in red. Or you can see the difference between that and a different sugar-based combination. Now, a point here is that the list of possible sugars right now is a controlled vocabulary field. That is a step that can be changed by an admin level user. But right now, this is nothing that you could. If a typical user wants to add new sugar, you'd have to convince an admin to go into a table and add a definition for that. Maybe in the future, a possibility to register a particular fragment. But for me, this is an admin level function. This is good. Yeah. If you're importing helm, for example, yep. Would you incorporate the bases that are recognized as that'd be a very relevant and important question. So we've just started having conversations with the helm people on how we want to import helm. So we walked through all of the procedures, but we have some training sets that we're going to put together and try to figure out. Our plan of action is really that if you have an exchangeable helm format, I think actually what Roland is on perhaps he can actually speak to this a little bit. But as I understand, the helm notation, there's the exchangeable helm that includes with it the monomer definition. And all we have to do is make sure that those monomers are either substances or already fragments, and then walk someone through how they would add them. So for phosphate linkages, it's exactly the same way. Choose which one of your linkages it is. You can see there. And on which site that phosphate passes up. Then hovering, you'll be able to see what the phosphate is and what the proceed to add explicit bases that are not what is a little more is a little complex at this moment. In that there will be a third button just to allow bases. As we were testing through, we realized that while the procedure we use for acid substitution is very useful, and we originally going to use that here, we realized that for very common modifications, it's worth to have just a drop down rather than having somebody select the full nucleoside and then put it there. So we will adapt sort of a shorthand notation for what I'm about to show you, which is the way that you do a nucleoside substitution at the moment. Amino acids. If I want a specific nuclease to change, this would be considered structural modification. A nucleoside substitution. Location probably. I could choose the new nucleoside substitute to that. Then I can search, find a full nucleoside record if there are good nucleosides you can think of. Because before I can describe whether it's a complete replacement or it's a partial replacement. Certain limits on the amount. Then you're notified of this down below. It says there's one modification, there's one linkage, there's two sugars, and how the structure you'll see that replacement. Also, as our nucleic acid, you go to the general classification to go to whether this is gene, vector, or so on. Some things about finally, you can have to add some reference for where you got the information from. And then you can continue. So I can see if there's any general questions. Specific questions? Any nebulous questions? Sure. So if you click on the sugars tab, you'll see, you'll say if you're starting from nothing, it will import with ribose by default. You'll choose on there which sugar you want. You select the sugars on the drop down. The site sugar is clicking the edit button, and then you can find which site that sugar is used at. It will, it'll keep track of what sites you've already specified sugar for. Normally, you can just click all suggested, because it will suggest all those ones that have been specified.
Most of the time it's very specific trial, because those things are used to be an anti-cancer substance, and you can alter the phosphate or either the sugar, and then you get in some difficulties, chirality, because when you do plus, and then the structure is first unique. It's also a very important thing is to find the difficulties. But fine example for you.
Oh yeah?
This is another example of Herman where we could capture chemically for the illegal nucleotide.
Yeah.
We overloaded it. I mean, you can capture full genes in here and illegals. And genes are much easier to capture than most of the illegals. The illegals have been modified.
What you go for nucleic acids, polymers, that's about 50.
Those drawing tools. Probably should go smaller than that, but
So of course, the dividing line, as you said, is ridiculous. And you could think in your days, someone would think, I have a small molecule, but I've taken my carbon to be my sugar, and I've taken this to be my base, and another to be my linker. And they could still figure out a way to jam pack just a small molecule into this, and it would be kind of ridiculous. There is some human decision making that should be involved in this, at least sort of general.
Okay.
Before I could add in. Then I find a review screen where I can see some information regarding what I've entered in. At this point, I can have relationships. I can add in certain properties and so on. So I registered this, and it always asks if we want to add a new specified substance for the substance. Specified substances always qualify substances for specified substances. So we can that concludes the nucleic acid overview. Up next.
A non sequitur question that came up yesterday. Yeah, I just got reminded of when we were going through the demo. The distinction in the summary table of codes versus names. You can enter in a name that is a code.
Oh yeah.
You have the separate sort of walkthrough step for codes.
Yep.
So how in practice should it actually be used?
Yeah, that's a good question. So it almost is something where maybe the terminology should be changed a little bit. Instead of saying code, it probably maybe just say company code or critical code or product code, something that it's not really a code. Codes, a table is used more for different databases.
it has to be a code system. There has to be some external code system.
But does that mean they're both entered into names and as code?
Well, on that, but we probably won't be doing that in the future. We would distinguish them. Like we ran a lot of Enix codes into names, but
So as a concrete example, a CAS registration number would never be added as a name.
Right.
A CAS registration number would be added as a code.
Yeah.
A code like Roche,
It would be entered in the name field. You don't have Roche's whole database now.
Yeah, exactly.
You want to share it with us.
Yeah, you want me to bring it up? Okay.
That
Thank
is
you.
also an
Yeah,
answer.
but that's a good point, that there is a little